Um, once you're graduated and you're out in the real world being a doctor, you're going to, of course, be encountering infectious diseases. When I was in school, we were hearing about bacterial resistance to antibiotics and so on. And the very first resistant strains of bacteria were starting to emerge in hospitals. The superbugs, were forecast. We now have resistance factors to everything. We've got some amazing things out there that we're going to have to continue. But one of the things that has really started shifting is superbugs in the hospital. Clostridia species, which include things like gangrene, tetanus, and botulism, have become a real problem in the hospitals. Clostridia difficile, C. diff, has become a really horror story in the hospitals. And even outpatients now are becoming colonized with C. difficile. I've been talking about this information for a long time. I did an integrated medicine workshop in Sebastopol, I think it was 3 years ago. The two DOs who are on faculty at Palo Alto Medical Group, they're the token osteopaths there by Stanford, were listening to me talk, and we got to the stuff on dysbiosis, and they said, you knew this stuff back in 1997? This is cutting edge information in gastroenterology. Because they have just started a functional medicine department at Stanford. What I wonder is, how are they going to tell what's going on if they can't palpate a liver and identify liver congestion, and they can't identify whether the cranial mechanism is affected by brain fog and so on? How can they monitor patients and interpret their symptoms if they don't touch them? But that's another conversation. Anyhow, Clostridia difficile now causes 99.7% of diarrhea on inpatients who develop diarrhea on antibiotics. That's 299 out of 300. Pretty good chance they got a C. diff overgrowth if they get diarrhea in the hospital, right? But what about outpatients, where we've always been a little bit more complacent because patients don't get resistance as often? And the sad news is that now, if a patient taking antibiotics as an outpatient develops diarrhea on the antibiotics, they have a better than 1 in 3. They've got a 35% chance of having a C. diff overgrowth. Now, Stanford is kind of caught onto this, but we're in an interesting time because I'm about to teach y'all some things that they don't even know about this at Stanford because of how I got it through my work with autistic children. This is gastroenterology applied to adults that I learned from children with autism. Okay? C. difficile is 35% outpatient diarrhea, but as a little code fact, did you know that 25% of diarrhea in dogs is caused by Clostridia? And by the way, it wasn't until 1996 that Purina bothered to study whether cats and dogs had different flora from humans. Because that's what I was taught. Weren't y'all all taught that cats and dogs and stuff have very different flora from humans? They don't. They have variations in subspecies, but they've got acidophilus and bifidus and things just like we do. And they also get clostridial overgrowth. And when they get them, they get diarrhea from it. And diarrhea, in dogs, they treat it with flagyl, metronidazole, or with just flooding them with acidophilus. Sometimes just flooding the gut will make clostridia go away. But there's another factor y'all need to know, and that is, how do you prove someone has C. difficile? You don't. You're out of rotations yet, but the way you prove it is you order a C. difficile antigen in their stool. But what percentage of people who have proven C. diff infections don't have the antigen in their stool? 30%, almost 1 in 3. And insurance companies won't let you treat them unless you can prove they have it. So guess what? A lot of sick people run around with C. diff because they can't prove they've got it. So now the big dispute at Stanford is over whether carrier states with C. diff are dangerous. Okay? And here's where the intellectual question comes in here. Stanford is only using 2 tests to do this. One is a traditional stool culture with the antigen, but the other one is a DNA test of the poop. Now, these DNA tests look and see what all organisms are there. So if Clostridia is there, it'll show But the problem with the DNA testing is it doesn't quantify how much is there. So is the presence of C. diff by itself considered pathological? No. It has to be there in enough amounts, or you have to have symptoms for it to, quote, matter. And yet, what they were finding at Stanford was that if you look for the antigen, let's say that, you know, like one in so many had Clostridia, but if you tested for the DNA, the percentage shot way up into the 90 percentile. Or are you going to treat all of them with vancomycin? No. So right now the big dispute in the functional medicine people who only have those two tests to go by is that you shouldn't treat everybody, but you should treat some people, but we don't know which ones because they can't quantify it. About 50, I guess it's 20 years ago, I had a mother from Palo Alto who brought me her little boy, and he was autistic and had spectrum symptoms. And she first introduced me to the concept of organic acid testing. Have any of you heard of organic acid testing? Well, have you heard of gas chromatography? How many of you had chemistry? Enough that you've taken a gas chromatography or you know what that means. Okay. Organic acid testing is gas chromatography of urine. Now, when I found out that Dr. Shaw in Overland Park, Kansas had patented gas chromatography of urine, I said, wow, that's like patenting using a microscope on blood. I mean, how did you get that patent? But it's a valid scientific methodology. When I took an undergraduate laboratory methods course at the University of Texas, we were checked out on gas chromatography. We were using it to identify plant compounds from South America. And we're doing all the math that's done by the computers on the chalkboard with graduate students. But organic acid testing looks for metabolites from different types of organisms. And based on how much metabolite is there, you can quantify how much Clostridia is there. So that's called organic acid testing. But it's, on this thing, just remember that 35% of outpatients who are on antibiotics, they get diarrhea, have C. diff. And what is the big deal about it? Hemorrhagic enterocolitis. If it really gets going, they can bleed out and die from Clostridia. But the issue is about Clostridia carriers. What are you going to do? Now, if they're symptomatic, then you treat them. But if you can't prove it, what do you do? In dogs, as I said, they treat them with metronidazole and flooding the gut with acidophilus. But in humans, we use metronidazole as the most common first line. But it doesn't always get it. So tinidazole, which is a first cousin of metronidazole, has a broader spectrum. Nitroxazide, which is a lineage, of course, is a newer drug, and it also will kill Clostridia. And then vancomycin, which is used orally that way. You can use clindamycin in some patients, which is another aminoglycoside like vancomycin. But we have antibiotics that we use to kill Clostridia. There are all kinds of arguments over how long to treat it and so on. I have an article in my source file that says you cannot clear a bowel infection in less than 20 days. Because like you're putting medicine in the walls of the hourglass and the infection's in the sand. So how long do you have to have the antibiotics present before all the infected sand is washed through? You see what I mean? So there are arguments. And I give my patients 20 days worth of antibiotics with refills, and I see them at the end of the first course. If they're still tender in their liver or down by the ileocecal, where this most commonly happens, I keep them on the antibiotics. I'll tell them, your body will tell us when you're done with this. Because once the infection's gone, there's no tenderness in the ileocecal, and their liver is not tender, and the reflex is quite good. Now, have you heard of gut-associated psychology? Well, there's a thing called the GAPS diet that is out there, and it's one of the things that parents of children with spectrum disorder get concerned about. In gut-associated psychology, they even have a thing called the GAPS diet, where they put children on special diets to try to inhibit the growth of certain organisms and so on. But it's based on the simple ideas like that we have a gut feeling. And the GI flora, because the neurotransmitters that operate in the gut are the same ones that operate in the brain. The disturbances in immune function in the gut can affect the brain and nervous system. And this is what I want to tell you all about that you probably have never heard before. Now, as a freshman in medical school, I got a great gift. And we called him Reddy Kilowatt. We had a physiology professor that was one of those guys that wore kids' tennis shoes and had a flat top and a bow tie all the time. And he was a really smart guy. And he ask us a great question. What is the function of the reticular activating system? It was our, it was going to be 10% of our neurophysiology grade was this paper we had to write on what the RAS did. But if you understand the RAS, you understand how your brain works. Now, where is the reticular activating system? Come on, y'all just had an anatomy and physiology. Where you hide it? Where you put that thing? Where is it found? Where is the reticular activating system? It's in your brainstem. It's a loose network of neurons that gates incoming stimuli. So when you go to sleep at night and your periphery goes limp, that's the reticular activating system does that. If you wake up because you hear footsteps that don't sound right while you're sleeping, that's the RAS that can wake you up too. So the RAS is what dampens down motor activity when you're sleeping. It's what ramps up your attention and so on in different states. And the RAS, the reticular activating system, is driven by adrenaline and noradrenaline. They're what alert you to incoming stimuli, and they're what tell you is brightest and fastest and most interesting in what's coming in. So the adrenergia, which is what you call it, them together, the effects of the adrenaline and noradrenaline considered together, that's called adrenergia, or adrenergic input. And it's what drives our attention and how we know what's important coming in from our sensorium. Epinephrine, the one that's evoked when you exercise from your muscles and joints, adrenaline, is what gives you sustained muscle tone to resist gravity and produce sustained effort. And the norepinephrine is more the flight response. It acts very shortly. It increases your sensitivity to pain, where adrenaline numbs you to pain. And when the norepinephrine is there, it causes short-time events. It causes spikes of blood pressure, irregular heartbeats, things that are acute adrenaline effects. As the adrenals wear out, which neurotransmitter remains dominant as they start to get tired? Do you know? Epinephrine or norepinephrine? In this context, norepinephrine is flight and epinephrine is fight. So as your adrenals wear out, which one goes away? Epinephrine. And what you end up with is your adrenals get tired as norepinephrine begins to dominate the adrenal responses to any kind of stress. And it makes sense. If you're losing, get me out of here, And so if over and over you're barely able to cope, pretty soon norepinephrine dominates, and like if something comes at you, get me out of here. Okay? As they exhaust, the point is that your adrenal functions change as they wear out, and they can wear out from immune stimulation. Okay? So when you're alerting to something, this is what the adrenaline and norepinephrine in your reticular activating system are doing. They're calling your attention to whatever's changing the fastest and the brightest. It's like the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park could only see what's moving and changing. What drives your attention is norepinephrine. That's what you're going to pay attention to. Okay, so when a stimulus and all this sensory input comes in, where does it go first? To the visual cortex. It comes in and goes back there. And then where does it go? To the frontals for thinking and planning. You alert to the stimulus, go, and then you got to decide what to do. And that's what happens in the frontal lobes. That's thinking and planning. And that's how you filter the adrenergia, whether it's norepinephrine dominant or mixed. You filter it with the GABA system. That's why Valium and benzodiazepines dampen adrenergia. They calm you down. But the difference is they distort the fractal patterns in your frontals, and GABA doesn't. But the benzodiazepines and gabapentin and drugs like that prolong the action of the GABA, but they don't replace the GABA. All this is things to stretch the GABA you've got, nothing's to get the GABA levels up. So the input is adrenergia, and then you have your choices of stuff are through the GABA system. And where is GABA? In the frontal cortex. And its primary function is thinking and planning, we call it, or execution of actions and anticipation of consequences of actions. Now, what is digital dementia? Have you heard of it? Well, you better hear about it, because it's a risk that you have, especially now that they're making everybody use electronic health records. But I will tell you an aside. The 2014 entering class at Tulane University Law School They take 250 kids in each year into their law school. By the end of October in 2014, 9 freshmen had killed themselves. When the school investigated why, that's 9 kids out of 250 in their first semester of law school killed themselves. So the school investigated and found out that 29 other students were seeing psychiatrists out of 250 kids. Would it surprise you if I told you it was the first year they went to all electronic textbooks? Okay, now what do electromagnetic fields do to enzyme systems? Come on, you guys know this stuff. What do electromagnetic fields do to enzyme kinetics? Does it pick them up or does it gum them up? What is allosterism? What governs the configuration of enzymes? Would an electromagnetic field alter the allosterism of an enzyme? You bet your boot it would. And would that improve its kinetics? Probably not. So guess what electromagnetic fields do to the frontal lobes? Okay, for 25 years I've tested neurotransmitter levels on my children. When they come in, their parents don't want to give them Ritalin. The most common neurotransmitter disturbance is not low serotonin. It's low GABA. And the second most common is when the adrenal axis is thrown off, not low serotonin. Now, what are the complaints of people who don't have enough GABA and don't have enough of these things? We're going to talk about that. The enzyme kinetics are what are screwed up by the fields, and I have tested people for years, and low GABA is common. You see kids with plenty of taurine, and they can't make GABA out of it. If you know what to do, you act. If you don't know what to do, what do? Contemplate. And what does that mean? You take the alerting stimulus, and if you don't know how to act and execute, you throw it to temporal lobes, long-term memory. Maybe I can remember something. And those are a separate pathway. The temporal lobes are serotonin dominated. The frontals are GABA dominated. But when you're thinking back, now we have to get into what does serotonin do. So if serotonin has something to do with long-term memory retrieval and temporal lobes, what does it do? Okay, do you know what happens when you dream it? Now I'm about to explain to you how your memory works. And although you probably already had neurophysiology, y'all probably don't know this. How do you retrieve memory? How do you get information back when you think of something that you already have heard of before? Okay, during the day, while you're wakeful, you're creating a short-term memory matrix for today. And it's adrenergically driven. It's adrenergically derived from the RES and how it stimulates your cortex during waking today. When you go to sleep tonight, what's going to happen is you're going to process your long-term memory your short-term memory into long-term when you dream. Some of the information that's already there is redundant. So the information that goes in that's already embedded in the long-term matrix is said to be degenerate. It doesn't generate any newness. The only things that you dream about have to be the things that are new that you're going to modify in your long-term memory matrix. And so that's said to be generate. So the proper terms for when you get new information that increases the complexity of your memory matrix is generate. But see, all knowledge is by definition degenerate. If a pattern doesn't repeat, there's nothing to know. Okay? So degeneracy and redundancy is the nature of knowing something. And yet, if you want to be healthy, you have to constantly generate newness, new information, or your brain doesn't grow. So when you go to sleep at night, the reason that you dream about this hodgepodge of odd ideas is because it's only the ideas that you can't come to closure on, that you don't know the answer to, that you have to keep processing during dream. And that's what you're doing when you dream. Now let's talk about how these neurotransmitters would affect behavior. If you have low GABA, what are you going to have if the person's trying to fall asleep? Well, they can't inhibit the adrenergia input, so they can't quit worrying, and so they'll have trouble falling asleep. Now, when you go into dream sleep and you start kicking in that short-term memory matrix, some of it's adrenergically driven, right? So if you don't have GABA there to dampen that down, you'll wake up when you go into dream sleep if you don't have enough GABA. I don't know if it's taught this way, but this is the physiology of it. GABA helps lower the adrenergic input. Serotonin has to do with long-term memory, and it may help you sleep, but, and then of course melatonin. Now, how much are y'all taught about melatonin? Are you taught anything about it? Where's it made? The pineal, right? Okay, but that's about all they told me to do. The pineal gland is what kicks in when you go into dream sleep. And the rhythms are usually between 4 and 8 cycles per second that we're in when we're drifting off. And it's during the early stages of sleep that you start producing melatonin. Now, when you go into REM sleep is when the pineal really starts to do its job. You have 2 lobes on the pineal. The right side has crystal inclusions, potassium and sodium and calcium and magnesium crystals of various proteins. But the left side has pure CSF in it. I don't know if you know what a dark matter lens is, but the pineal gland is shaped like a dark matter lens. It's like a pine cone. But that's why it's shaped that way. And they say that's why all religious staffs have the pine cone in the end of it. It's supposed to resemble the pineal gland in the head. Now, if you don't know this, the pineal gland lining is rods, like in the eye. But the rods that line the pineal respond to frequencies of light beyond the visible. So it can, how much? The crystals in the fluid in the pineal give off 90 photons per second. And the rods that are in it can, as I said, see light spectra beyond the visible. And the neurotransmitter that powers the pineal is DMT, dimethyltryptamine, the God molecule that your body makes every night when you REM cycle. So, every night when you go into dream sleep, you have an organ in your head that can transmit and receive light in frequencies beyond the visible that's powered by the God molecule that Plato called the seat of the soul. And fluoridation makes the pineal gland calcify. But back to behavior and GABA. What does low GABA make people act? How does it affect their behavior? I had a medical student on my service who just spent a month at the state hospital, and he heard me doing this talk, and he goes, "Oh my God, all the young boys up there at the state hospital that have this is what's wrong with them." So they're gamers, they're video in all the time, they've got their cell phone next to their head all the time, so they've depleted their GABA, but they have healthy adrenal. So what does that mean? They can't throttle themselves. So what do if they get upset? They punch somebody's lights out. They can't control themselves. So they end up in trouble, the kids who have low GABA and healthy adrenals. If you have low GABA and adrenal fatigue, remember what I said about norepinephrine and epinephrine? Now you've got norepi, adrenal responses, and no GABA to catch them. So what do you have there? Panic disorder. Okay? I had a young woman who was in a graduate program getting her doctorate, and her pre-doc advisor had advised her to falsify part of her data for her doctoral thesis. She was freaked out and didn't know what to do about it because she's a graduate student. She didn't know what that meant. I think that her pre-doc advisor was seeing that he needed to get her on through the program, and he didn't figure that the data substitution or what he was having her do would be that big a deal. But to the student, it was like, "You're asking me to put bad data in my doctoral thesis," and so. But she couldn't take him on because she had depleted GABA, and she had shot adrenals and was having panic attacks, one after the other. Now, in the real world of being a college kid and getting a graduate degree, what did she do? She went home on the weekend to see her parents. She had a panic attack while she was there. Her dad had Kaiser. She goes to Kaiser in Palo Alto. They go in, she's a triage nurse input, so they see her and they say, "Aha, panic disorder." And they send her to psychiatry. Have they done anything to diagnose what's wrong with her? No. But they have already decided what's wrong with her. They sent her on to psychiatry, and guess what? She got given Xanax. And that made her feel weird, and so after she went back for follow-up, they gave her Xanax and an SSRI, and she said it made her feel even weirder, so they took her off the Xanax and switched to the SSRIs. Meanwhile, guess who kept having panic attacks? So she had a boyfriend who didn't know what to do. Now remember, men are fixers. If they can't fix something, they get mad or they avoid you. So his way of dealing with her panic disorder was to slap her when she went out of control, which anchored it and made it hard for her to do it, because then every time she started having a panic attack, it meant the world was going to come to an end, the boyfriend was going to get mad and everything. That's how confused people get. Luckily, she had physiology, so I could reason with her. So if we straighten out her GABA and got her adrenal axis straightened out, guess who quit her graduate program, enrolled in a different school, had the neurotransmitters to work with to solve the problem. But that's how it is in the real world. But they feel overwhelmed, like they cannot deal with what's coming at them because they don't have the frontal lobes to filter it with. Now, what does high histamine look like in the nervous system? What does high histamine in the brain look like? A psychotic break. In the emergency room, you may have to give Haldol to somebody, vitamin H. Okay? And why don't we give them Haldol? Because they are having a psychotic break. But what causes that? High levels of histamine in the brain. Now, have you ever seen little kids get wired when you give them antihistamines? Like little kids, you give them like Dimetap or something like that, and they get wired from it. One of my friends teaches neurophysiology up at Pacific University in Oregon. And I asked him that question. He's a neurophysiologist. He said, well, in children, antihistamines elevate histamine in the brain, and in adults it lowers it. So high histamine in the brain looks like psychosis. And little kids who get high histamine are bing, bing, bing off the wall. And that's how histamine alters behavior. It makes them act agitated and so on. But remember that what they're looking for is newness. What histamine evokes in your white cells is to find what's new, and what it evokes in the nervous system is to figure out what's new. So I try to teach the patients how to know these things. I drill all these ideas into my patients, and I make them learn about how herbs and stuff that they can use can help them keep this all under control. One of the things that I do that other doctors don't do is I give them weapons to try to reestablish the mucus barrier, which was the original defect in the immune system in the first place. Something got through. I put them on glutathione if they have colitis or things to help the T cells in the gut. And I give them things like Saccharomyces boulardii and Acidophilus in order to clean up the gut flora. I give them zinc and things like that if I think that they need it. Now, one of the ways that you can help them is like the veterinarians taught us. You can suppress their flora. Only antibiotics are not the best way to do this if you're talking about patients who are going to live on these things. So instead, I use herbs, and I teach them how to do it. And citrus seed extract, grapefruit seed extract. And you have to be careful about medication interactions with citrus seed because it interferes with absorption of calcium channel blockers and so on. But it's a great way to suppress yeast and gram-negative bacteria. So you can use citrus seed extract, plant tannins, garlic, things like that are foods to suppress yeast and gram-negatives. And uva ursi, which is another herb, that's bearberry, is where quinolones come from. The whole class of antibiotics called quinolones came from uva ursi. But the quinolones in uva ursi are very short-acting. They've washed through the system within a couple hours. So what do they do to keep them in there? They fluoridate them. So that's what Cipro and Levaquin are, okay? They're fluoridated quinolones so that they'll last in the system longer. But they come from uva ursi. Uva is a great herb that patients can get that deals with bladder problems as well as yeast problems. And then you can do things like oregano and walnut leaf and olive leaf and golden keel and so on. You can suppress parasites after you've treated them with the appropriate antimicrobials by using things like plant tannins and citrus seed. But I keep patients on liver support, and I keep them on probiotics, and I use secretagogues when I'm treating them, and I want the mucus to start working. And then if you don't know about Saccharomyces boulardii, it's a yeast that displaces candida and harmful yeasts, and it restores tight junctions in mucosal cells. And if you look at the villi in the colon of patients who've had C. diff, it makes the villi go back to normal, cleans them up, and they look really healthy. Okay, now your differential diagnosis in all these conditions is still the same. You still have to be a doctor. You have to be suspicious of gallbladder disease. You have to screen them for hepatitis. You have to do the appropriate, regular being a doctor. But I'm here to tell you that 90% of what you're going to see at least is this immune stuff. However, it manifests as a disease, some sort of infection or imbalance in their gut, or their gut flora, or something happens, a downstream effect to it. And these things are what you have to be vigilant for, but more commonly the things I'm talking about that you see. Now, how many of you have heard of interstitial cystitis? Do you know what that means? It's a patient who acts like they have a bladder infection and they don't. And interstitial cystitis is no fun at all. The patients who have it feel like they have a bladder infection 24/7. And it's been very difficult to treat. Now, who knows what DMSO is? Dimethyl sulfazoxazole. DMSO was a fad back in the 70s in Arizona. Sun City, Arizona, where all the retirees were, they were using DMSO on every kind of arthritis you could think of. They would rub it on the skin and the joint would quit hurting. Because it's a sulfur donor, remember sulfonation, all inflammation ends in sulfonation. So they were putting DMSO on their sore joints and it was making the joints get sore. But DMSO was not approved for use in humans because it caused cataracts in rabbits. Well, the urologist found that it would turn off interstitial cystitis. So now the only legal, officially approved use of DMSO in medicine is for interstitial cystitis. But the trouble with using it to treat it is it does nothing about the cause, which is coming from the gut. Okay, they've got an immune activation going on, and they've got histamine receptors in the bladder reacting to it. Now, there's something I know about niacin that y'all may not know. Who knows what niacin does to you? That's when you flush. Why do you flush when you take niacin? Because it makes your mast cells dump what's inside of them. So it dumps out all this histamine when you flush from it. Now, in the interstitial cystitis, I'm telling you that their bladder is all charged up with histamine. So if you have them do niacin flushes, they quit having interstitial cystitis. And this is not in the literature. The histamine comes from the gut, it sensitizes the bladder. You can make it go away by doing niacin flushes, but the only officially effective treatment for interstitial cystitis is DMSO in the bladder. But you can use niacin flushes to lower histamine in the system. There are other herbs that are used in these conditions, things like cabbage root and aloe vera and licorice. But ashwagandha and other Ayurvedic herbs are used as adaptogens and so on to help those systems, like adjust these things. I don't recommend colonics. You'll hear some people who swear by them. There are legal issues about them if they perforate a diverticulum or something or just cause trouble. I don't believe that it's normal to have that much water up in your colon in the first place. And so there's just something that feels wrong about it to me. But some people will swear by colonics, but I don't recommend them. You'll also hear people talk about doing cleanses. You better make sure they're not sick before you make them do one. But if they are not toxic, a cleanse can be really beneficial. I have some patients do them after I clean them out. But I don't recommend that people just do liver cleanses without knowing what's wrong with them. And then there's different phases as you work with patients to try to help them with this condition. Initially, I spend a lot of time teaching and making them come to understand these ideas. And my students tell me that I do more patient education than anybody they've ever seen. But I treat patients like they have good sense. I treat them like doctors. I use the same handouts with my patients I use with my medical students. It's not that hard. They're just big words. So most of it is common sense as you start to understand. And so I watch them, and then we go into a phase where I watch them at usually 2 or 3 week intervals, so I'm sure that they're cleaned out and they're going to be all right, and then I let them go. And that's what I call give them rope phase, because they will hang themselves eventually. The odds of getting a relapse of dysbiosis and going sideways with their immune system is 5 out of 6. So eventually, unless they really paid attention and listened and got lucky, they'll come back, because immune dysfunction is rampant. There's so many things that can cause it, and it's so common in the population. And among patients, you've got a selected population, so you're going to see this whether you recognize it or not. So I teach them how to interpret their body feelings. Everybody that comes to me, I talk to them about their ileocecal, about their liver. I teach them how it feels when their liver's congested, how it feels when it goes down. I make them listen to me. They get tired of it sometimes. Some don't want to know it. The ones that benefit the most are the ones who listen. And if you can get through them, you can really help them. So I teach them about learning how to identify liver pain, liver congestion. I teach them what to do about it, how to up their NAC and glutathione. I teach them about using probiotics. I teach them to hydrate. Okay, a little side on hydration. They did a study on water drinkers in Europe. Most of us hear the things about 8 glasses of water a day. That's all kind of distortion. The original studies were 6 glasses of any kind of fluid. It didn't have to be water. And the study I'm talking about, it was anything. It could be coffee, doesn't matter, fluid, okay? It was a big study, 2,500 people, all over the age of 65. And it was a long study, it went on for 3 years. Half the group, about 1,200 of them, they said, hydrate however you please. We just want to track you. The other half, they made drink 6 glasses of fluid a day. That's 2 with each meal. They tracked them 3 years, all over the age of 65. Among the water drinkers, not one stroke or heart attack, compared to 3% in the other group. Now, some of them hydrated correctly because they were left to their own devices, but that doesn't really point out how underhydration can kill you. Nothing, like I don't know how else to get it across to you. 1 in 30 people die of a stroke or heart attack because they didn't hydrate. Okay? That's how important hydration is. Now, what causes essential hypertension? Nobody knew. Okay. How many people you heard about metabolic syndrome? They're drilling that into you yet? What is metabolic syndrome? It's a bullshit term. It doesn't mean anything. What do they teach you it means? It's the diseases of aging that come on in the 50s and 60s, right? And what does it start with? Hypertension. What causes hypertension? Y'all are osteopathic students. What did I tell you about the liver early on in this talk? What percentage of people have congested livers? 5 out of 6. Okay, how many of you have ever seen a muffler on a car? How many of you hot rodders? Any of you know about cars? I'm from Texas. I was a hot rodder when I was a kid. We drove fast. So what's inside a muffler? Baffles. What is a baffle? Do you know? Okay, if you look at a muffler, you've got tubes that run this way, but inside the muffler there are these partitions that run perpendicular to the flow. They're called baffles. And it breaks up the flow through there, okay? In your body,